At my son's engagement dinner, I knocked over a glass of wine. My husband snapped his fingers in front of all the guests. "Look at her, the useless housewife. Get on your knees and clean it up now." As I bent down, tears blurring my vision, the bride's billionaire father suddenly stood up and kicked his chair away. He knelt down on the floor beside me, cupped my face in his hands, and murmured, "Elizabeth, you vanished 30 years ago. I never stopped loving you." I couldn't move. I felt the world tilt beneath me. "I'm grateful you're here. Stay with me until the end of my story and write in the comments which city you're watching from so I can see how far my words travel. My name is Elizabeth. I'm 59 years old. I've been married to Bradley for 39 years, and for those same 39 years, I've felt invisible. Tonight was meant to be a celebration, our son Dylan's engagement dinner at the Preston Valley Country Club. Instead, it became the night my entire life shifted. I should have known something would go wrong. Something always did whenever Bradley wanted to impress people. Crystal chandeliers threw shimmering light across the Persian rugs as I moved carefully between the tables, pouring wine for the guests. Yes, pouring. At my own son's engagement party. "Elizabeth, hurry up with that wine," Bradley barked from across the room, his voice slicing through the low buzz of small talk. "These people don't have all night." Heat rushed to my face as several guests glanced over. Mrs. Henderson, whose husband worked with Bradley at the car dealership, shook her head in disapproval while other country club members whispered behind their linen napkins. I was the only wife serving at her own son's celebration, but Bradley insisted we couldn't waste money on extra catering staff. "Coming, dear," I answered quietly, gripping the bottle a little tighter. It felt heavier than usual, or maybe my hands were just weaker. At 59, I'd learned how to keep my tone calm even when my heart was breaking. Dylan sat at the head table with his fiancée, Sophia. She was stunning, 35, with long auburn hair and sharp green eyes. More importantly, she treated me with genuine kindness, which was rare in Bradley's world. Her father sat beside her, a distinguished man in his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair and gentle eyes. I'd heard he was a very wealthy businessman, but he didn't seem like the usual arrogant crowd Bradley loved to impress. As I approached their table, Sophia gave me a warm smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. You don't need to serve us. Please sit and enjoy the party." Bradley's booming laugh cut across the room. "Don't mind Elizabeth, Sophia. She likes keeping busy. Gives her a sense of purpose." I forced a smile and kept pouring. The humiliation burned in my chest, but I'd grown used to swallowing it. After 39 years with Bradley, I knew that arguing only made the outcome worse. At least Dylan looked uncomfortable at his father's remark. That tiny flicker of shame on his face comforted me more than I'd ever admit. The disaster happened when I reached for Sophia's father's glass. My sleeve brushed against his water glass, and suddenly, time slowed. The wine bottle tipped, and a deep red stream cascaded across the snow-white tablecloth and onto the expensive Persian rug beneath our feet. The room went dead silent. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," I whispered, scrambling for napkins. My hands trembled as I tried to stop the spreading stain. Bradley's face darkened to an alarming shade of purple. He pushed back his chair so hard it screeched against the floor, the sound cutting through the silence like a blade. Everyone was staring now. "Look at her," Bradley declared, his voice thick with contempt. He snapped his fingers in front of all of them. Doctors, lawyers, business owners, people I'd known for years. Clumsy housewife, this is exactly why I handle everything. Important in this family. My heart hammered as I dropped to my knees, dabbing at the rug with a napkin. The smell of the wine mixed with the sickening taste of shame. I could feel every pair of eyes on me. Some judging, some pitying, none helping. "Get on your knees and clean it now," Bradley ordered, jabbing a finger at the stain. "And do it right this time." I was already kneeling, but the way he said it, as if I were the help, not his wife, cracked something deep inside me. Tears slipped down my cheeks as I scrubbed the rug, my knees aching against the hard floor through the thin fabric of my dress. That's when everything changed. Sophia's father, whose name I still didn't know, suddenly rose from his chair. The legs scraped sharply against the floor as he pushed it back with such force that it nearly toppled. The look in his eyes was unlike anything I had ever seen. Cold fury, tightly controlled. "What did you just say to her?" he asked quietly, his tone dangerous. Bradley stiffened, clearly not used to being confronted. "Excuse me?" Without another word, Sophia's father kicked his own chair aside. It crashed onto the floor with a loud thud that made several guests gasp. Then he did something that stole the air from my lungs. He lowered himself to the floor beside me, his expensive suit pressed into the wine-soaked rug as he gently placed his hands on either side of my face, tilting my chin up so I had no choice but to look at him. His touch was careful, reverent, so different from Bradley's rough, impatient grip. When our eyes met, all the color drained from his face. "Elizabeth," he breathed, his voice cracking. "Elizabeth Marie." I stared into his eyes. Warm, deep brown eyes I knew instantly, even after all these years. Eyes that had once looked at me with nothing but love when I was 19. Eyes that had followed me into my dreams for nearly 4 decades. Otto. His name slipped out of my mouth like a prayer I'd forgotten I knew how to say. His thumbs brushed my tears away with heartbreaking tenderness as he spoke in a low, shaking voice. "You vanished 39 years ago," he murmured. "I searched everywhere for you. I never stopped loving you." In that moment, the rest of the room simply disappeared. The shocked gasps, the clink of glasses, the rustle of expensive clothes, Bradley's sputtering outrage, Dylan's stunned stare. None of it mattered. All I could see was Otto, the man I had loved with every part of my young heart, the man I had been forced to leave behind when I found out I was pregnant with Dylan. I had to, I tried to say, but my voice broke and the words dissolved in my throat. Otto's gaze roamed my face, taking in the wrinkles time had drawn there, the tiredness that had dulled my smile. "What happened to you?" he whispered. "Where did you go?" Before I could answer, Bradley's furious voice thundered above us. "What the hell is this? Elizabeth, get up, right now." Otto's jaw tightened, but he didn't move his hands from my face. Instead, he eased me up from the floor, his touch protective, steady. He was taller than I remembered, his shoulders broader, his presence even more commanding. But the gentle way he held me was exactly the same. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice now firm and carrying through the silence of the room, "is clearly a woman who deserves respect, not humiliation." He turned fully toward Bradley, and something in his expression made my husband instinctively step back. "I'm Otto Blackwell," he announced. "I own Blackwell Industries, and you, sir, have just made the biggest mistake of your life." A ripple of gasps went through the guests. Everyone in Dallas knew the name Otto Blackwell. They knew the rumors about his wealth, his power, his influence, hundreds of millions at least, maybe more. But all I could think about wasn't his money or his name. It was the young man who used to sit with me under the oak tree at Eastfield Community College, reading poetry in a soft voice only I was meant to hear. "Dad?" Sophia's voice cut through the charged silence. She was staring at her father like she'd never seen him before. "You know Dylan's mother?" she asked, confusion written all over her face. Otto glanced briefly at his daughter, at the young woman engaged to my son, and then looked back at me. The realization hit me in a wave. Our children were about to marry each other. "I knew Elizabeth a long time ago," he said slowly. "We were—" He hesitated, his eyes locked with mine. "Very close friends." Bradley's color had shifted from rage purple to sickly white. "This is insane," he snapped. "Elizabeth, we're leaving. Now." But Otto moved calmly between us, putting his body in my husband's path, and for the first time in 39 years, someone stood between me and Bradley's anger, on my side. "I don't think Elizabeth wants to leave," Otto said evenly. "Do you, Elizabeth?" Every gaze in the room pinned itself to me. Bradley's eyes were burning with fury and fear. Dylan's were full of worry. Sophia's were wide with questions. Otto's held something I hadn't seen directed at me in decades: hope. After almost 40 years of being silenced, I suddenly had a choice. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. How was I supposed to explain 39 years of secrets in front of a room full of strangers and acquaintances? How could I tell my son that the man he called Dad had never been the hero he believed? How could I admit that I'd been stuck in this marriage since I was 19 with no real way out? Otto seemed to read my thoughts. He gently took my hand, the one still marked by Bradley's wedding ring, and gave it a soft squeeze. "You don't have to say anything right now," he murmured so only I could hear. "But Elizabeth, you should know that some of us never forgot you." The way he said it made my heart stop. After all the years of loneliness and quiet suffering, he still remembered the girl I once was. The girl who loved books and poetry. The girl who dreamed of teaching, of traveling, of living a life filled with love instead of fear. The girl I'd buried the day I became Mrs. Bradley Morrison, standing there in a wine-stained dress, surrounded by stunned faces and caught between the man who had owned my past and the man who had always held my heart. I understood something terrifying and liberating at once. The life I'd built, brick by careful brick, was about to collapse. And for the first time in 39 years, I wasn't sure that was a tragedy. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Bradley for nearly 4 decades, staring at the ceiling while he snored beside me as if nothing had happened. The scene at the country club replayed over and over in my mind. Otto's stunned expression when he recognized me, the tenderness in his touch as his hand brushed my cheek, the tremor in his voice when he said my name. But more than anything, I heard the same sentence echoing in my head. "I never stopped loving you." Bradley had barely said a word during the drive home. His silence was heavier than any insult he'd ever thrown at me. I knew that silence. It meant he was planning, calculating how to regain control, how to isolate me, how to make sure I never saw Otto again. At 59, I was still being treated like a disobedient child instead of a grown woman with a mind and heart of her own. As the first pale light of morning slipped through the bedroom curtains, I gave up on sleep. I slid out of bed quietly and walked down the hallway to the kitchen. The house felt strange, like it was holding its breath. The same walls, the same furniture, the same familiar smells. But underneath it all, a sense that something huge had shifted, and nothing would go back to the way it was. My hands trembled as I made a pot of coffee. I sat alone at the small kitchen table where I'd eaten thousands of silent, one-sided meals, listening to the ticking of the clock. That's when the memories hit me, sharp, bright, and painful, as if no time had passed at all. I was 18, working part-time at the campus bookstore and studying English literature at Eastfield Community College. 2 years earlier, my parents had died in a car accident, leaving me with just enough insurance money to cover community college, as long as I counted every dollar like it was my last. The first time I saw Otto was in Professor Martinez's poetry class. He always sat in the back row, slipping into the classroom exactly 3 minutes before the lecture started, carrying a worn leather notebook and a cup of coffee that always smelled faintly of vanilla. He was 19 then, a year older than me, a business major who took literature classes for fun, as he later told me. But it wasn't his warm brown eyes or his gentle smile that caught my attention first. It was the way he listened. When other students spoke, Otto didn't just stare ahead or pretend to care. He focused on them completely, nodding, asking thoughtful questions, making them feel like their thoughts actually mattered. After my parents died, I'd gotten used to feeling invisible. Otto's attention felt like stepping into sunlight after a very long winter. We started talking after class about the poems we'd read. Soon those conversations spilled into the campus coffee shop and then into long walks around the small lake behind the school. Otto had dreams, big ones. He talked about building a business empire, not to hoard money, but to create something that mattered. "I want to build affordable housing," he told me one crisp autumn afternoon as we sat beneath our favorite oak tree, its leaves turning gold and drifting around us. "Good homes for families who work hard but still can't afford much. Everyone deserves a safe place to raise their kids." I could have listened to him for hours. His eyes lit up when he described the houses he wanted to build, the neighborhoods he imagined, the communities he hoped to create. But what I loved most was that he always included me in those dreams. "When we're married," he'd say, "never if, always when, because we both felt it was inevitable. You can help me design the interiors. You have a gift for making places feel like home." Those were the happiest months of my life. We studied together in the library, whispering jokes between the shelves. Otto would show up with wildflowers he'd picked on his way to campus, daisies, black-eyed Susans, whatever he could find. I pressed one of those flowers inside my copy of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Sonnets, the book he gave me for my 19th birthday. We made love for the first time that November in his small apartment off campus. He was so gentle, so patient with me. Afterward, he held me close and whispered into my hair, "I'm going to love you for the rest of my life, Elizabeth Marie, I promise." And I believed him. God help me, I believed every single word. The pregnancy test turned positive in February 1985. I was 3 weeks late, but I already knew. My body felt different, like it belonged to someone new. I sat on the cold bathroom floor of my tiny apartment, staring at those 2 pink lines. My first reaction wasn't fear. It was joy. Otto and I were having a baby. We'd talked about children before. He wanted 4, I wanted 3. We joked that we'd aim for 3 and let life decide the rest. We weren't married yet, but we talked about it all the time. Otto had been saving up to buy me a ring, even showing me little sketches of the simple band he wanted to get. That day, I practically floated to campus. I couldn't wait to tell him. We'd figure it out together, like we always did. Maybe we'd move the wedding up. Maybe we'd find a bigger apartment. It wouldn't be easy, but we loved each other. That had always been enough. I never got to tell him. Bradley Morrison came into my life like a storm cloud on a clear day. He was 22 then, 4 years older than Otto, and worked as a manager at his father's car dealership. More importantly, he was the brother of Margaret Morrison, my supervisor at the campus bookstore. "My brother's been asking about you," Margaret mentioned one Thursday afternoon while I was shelving returned textbooks. "He saw you here last week and thought you were pretty. He wants to take you to dinner." I laughed, not unkindly, just surprised. "That's very flattering, Margaret, but I already have a boyfriend." Her smile faded, replaced by a look of practical concern. "Elizabeth, honey, you need to think realistically," she said. "Bradley has a solid job, money in the bank, a clear future. That college boy you're seeing," she shook her head, "dreams don't pay the bills." "Otto isn't just dreams," I protested. "He's smart. He works hard and he's broke," Margaret cut in. "Look, I like you. You're a good worker, responsible, but you're an orphan with no family to fall back on. If you got pregnant or sick or lost your job, what could that boy really do for you? Bradley could take care of you properly." I tried to brush it off, but Margaret didn't let it go. She arranged convenient, accidental meetings with Bradley at the bookstore. He was attractive in a polished, conventional way, dark hair, blue eyes, well-dressed. He clearly had money and stability. But there was something in the way he looked at me that knotted my stomach. It wasn't admiration, it was possession. The real trouble began when I started missing shifts because of morning sickness. I told Margaret I had the flu, but she was too sharp not to notice. 2 weeks later, she cornered me in the break room. "You're pregnant, aren't you?" she asked. My face must have given me away, because she nodded as if she'd just confirmed a suspicion. "Does he know?" she pressed. "Not yet," I admitted. "I'm going to tell Otto tonight." "Otto?" she repeated, genuinely shocked. "Elizabeth, that boy can barely pay his own rent. How's he going to support a wife and baby? He'll probably run the minute you tell him." "He won't run," I said firmly. "Otto loves me." Margaret sighed like she was dealing with a foolish child. "Honey, I've seen this story before. He always sat in the back row, slipping into the classroom exactly 3 minutes before the lecture started, a worn leather notebook in one hand and a cup of coffee that smelled faintly of vanilla in the other. He was 19, a year older than me, a business major who, as he later admitted with a shy smile, took literature classes just for fun. But the first thing that struck me about him wasn't his warm brown eyes or his gentle smile. It was the way he listened. When other students spoke, Otto gave them his full attention, leaning forward slightly, nodding, asking thoughtful questions that proved he truly cared about what they were saying. In a world where I had felt invisible ever since my parents died, Otto's attention felt like sunlight after a very long winter. We started talking after class about the poems we were assigned. Soon those conversations drifted to the campus coffee shop, then turned into long walks around the little lake behind the school. Otto had dreams, big, audacious dreams. He wanted to build a business empire, not just to get rich, but to create something meaningful that would make people's lives better. "I want to build affordable housing," he told me one crisp autumn afternoon as we sat beneath our favorite oak tree, golden leaves scattered at our feet. "Good homes for families who work hard but can't afford much. Everyone deserves a safe place to raise their kids." I loved listening to him. His eyes lit up when he talked about the homes he would build and the communities he wanted to create. But what I cherished most was that he always pictured me in that future with him. "When we're married," he would say, not if, but when, because we both felt it was only a matter of time. "You can help me design the interiors. You make every place feel like home." Those were the happiest months of my life. We studied side by side in the library, sharing quiet jokes between rows of books. Otto would bring me wildflowers he'd picked on his way to campus, daisies, black-eyed Susans, whatever he could find. I pressed one of those flowers inside my copy of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Sonnets, the book he gave me for my 19th birthday. We made love for the first time that November in his tiny off-campus apartment. He was so gentle, so careful with me. Afterward, he held me close, his breath warm against my hair as he whispered, "I'm going to love you for the rest of my life, Elizabeth Marie, I promise." And I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. The pregnancy test turned positive in February 1985. I was 3 weeks late, but I'd known even before I saw the result. My body felt different, like it had quietly shifted into a new life. I sat on the cold tile of my small bathroom floor, staring at the 2 pink lines, and my first feeling wasn't fear. It was joy. Otto and I were going to have a baby. We had talked about children before. He wanted 4, I wanted 3. We joked about compromising at 3 and seeing what happened. We weren't married yet, but we talked about it constantly. He'd been saving for a ring, even showing me little sketches of the simple band he wanted to buy. That day, I practically floated to campus. I couldn't wait to tell him. We'd figure everything out together, the way we always did. Maybe we'd move up the wedding. Maybe we'd find a slightly bigger apartment. It would be hard, but we had love. And back then I thought love could fix anything. I never got the chance to tell him. Bradley Morrison entered my life like a storm cloud over a clear sky. He was 22, 4 years older than Otto, the manager, at his father's car dealership. More importantly, he was Margaret Morrison's brother, and Margaret was my supervisor at the campus bookstore. "My brother's been asking about you," Margaret said one Thursday as I shelved returned textbooks. "He saw you here last week and thinks you're pretty. He wants to take you out to dinner." I laughed, not unkindly, just surprised. "That's very flattering, Margaret, but I have a boyfriend." Her expression hardened. "Elizabeth, honey, you need to think practically. Bradley has a good job, money in the bank, a real future. That college boy you're seeing?" She shook her head. "Dreams don't pay bills." "Otto isn't just dreams," I protested. "He's smart, he works hard, he is broke," she cut in. "Look, I like you, you're responsible, but you're an orphan. You don't have anyone to fall back on. If you got pregnant or sick or lost your job, what could that boy really do for you? Bradley could take care of you properly." I tried to brush it off, but Margaret didn't let it go. She arranged coincidences, so Bradley kept dropping by the bookstore when I was working. He was conventionally handsome, dark hair, blue eyes, and he clearly had money. But there was something about the way he looked at me that made my skin crawl, like I was something he could own, not someone he could love. The real trouble began when I started missing shifts because of morning sickness. I told Margaret it was the flu, but she was sharper than I'd given her credit for. 2 weeks later, she cornered me in the break room. "You're pregnant, aren't you?" My silence was answer enough. She nodded slowly, her lips pressing into a tight line. "Does he know?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "I'm going to tell Otto tonight." "Otto?" She actually looked shocked. "Elizabeth, that boy can barely pay his own rent. How is he going to support a wife and a baby? He'll probably run as soon as he finds out." "He won't," I insisted. "Otto loves me." Margaret sighed like she was dealing with a foolish child. "Honey, I've seen this story before. College boys love to play house until real life shows up. But Bradley—" She paused deliberately. "Bradley's been talking about marriage. He really cares about you, and he'd be willing to give that baby a name and a future." Those words hit me like a punch. A name. In 1985, in our small conservative town, having a child out of wedlock was a social death sentence. I'd watched how people treated unmarried mothers, the whispers, the judgment, the way opportunities vanished. But Otto would marry me. I was sure of it. We were already planning a future together. That certainty cracked the day Margaret showed me the newspaper clipping. "I didn't want to show you this," she said, her voice dripping with rehearsed sympathy. "But you need to know who you're really dealing with." The headline read, "Local family's business venture fails, leaving investors millions in debt." Otto's last name jumped out at me. The article described how his father's construction company had collapsed, taking people's life savings with it. The Blackwells were being sued. They'd lost their home. "He never told you, did he?" Margaret asked softly. "About his family's financial problems?" She leaned closer. "Elizabeth, this boy isn't just poor. His family ruins other people's lives. Do you honestly want to tie yourself and your baby to that?" My hands trembled as I read. Otto had mentioned his father having some business trouble, but he'd made it sound temporary, fixable. This article painted his whole family as dangerous, irresponsible, toxic. "Think about your baby," Margaret pressed. "Do you want to raise a child in poverty with a father from a family of liars? Bradley can offer security, respectability. He's already said he'd marry you despite the situation. Despite the situation, as if my pregnancy were a stain instead of a miracle." "I need to think," I whispered. "Don't think too long," she warned. "Bradley's a good catch. He won't wait forever, and every day you wait, your little secret is going to be harder to hide." That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the phone. I wanted to call Otto, to ask about the article, to tell him about the baby growing inside me. But Margaret's voice wouldn't leave my head. What if she was right? What if he panicked? What if his family's problems meant he could never support us? I laid my hand over my still flat stomach and thought about the tiny life depending on me. Did I have the right to risk my child's future for love? What kind of mother chose romance over security? The next day, I called in sick and spent hours circling the lake where Otto and I had laughed and dreamed together. By the time the sun set, my decision was made. I would marry Bradley Morrison. I never told Otto I was pregnant. Instead, I told him I had realized we wanted different things, that I needed stability more than I needed love. I watched his heart break in those beautiful brown eyes, and I forced myself to turn away. For the baby, I told myself. For our future. 2 months later, I became Mrs. Bradley Morrison. Dylan was born 6 months after that, supposedly premature, a perfect 7-pound baby boy. Bradley never questioned the timing, and I never told him that Dylan wasn't his. I kept that secret for 39 years. I told myself over and over that I had done the right thing. But sitting in my kitchen at dawn, replaying the gentle way Otto had touched my face at the country club, I couldn't help wondering if I hadn't ruined all of our lives instead. The cruelest part was that Otto had become everything he'd dreamed of being, and more. While I spent decades as Bradley's unpaid maid, Otto built the very empire he used to describe under that old oak tree. He created affordable housing, helped thousands of families find safe places to live. He became the man he'd always promised he would be. And from the way he'd looked at me that night, it seemed he'd never forgotten the girl who listened to his dreams. I slipped a hand into my apron pocket and took out the one secret I'd kept from Bradley all these years, a tiny silver locket. Inside was the pressed flower Otto had given me on my 19th birthday. For nearly 4 decades I'd hidden it, the last fragment of the person I used to be. Sitting alone in that quiet kitchen, I opened the locket. The flower was faded but still intact, still delicate and beautiful, preserved in time, just like my love for the boy who had given it to me. And now he was back in my life, at the very moment I'd decided it was far too late for dreams. 3 days passed after the disastrous engagement dinner. I moved through them like a ghost. Bradley barely spoke to me, which was almost a relief. His silence meant he was plotting something, but for the moment, the house was peaceful enough for me to think clearly, maybe for the first time in years. On Tuesday morning, I was in the kitchen, mindlessly washing dishes while Bradley read his newspaper at the table when the doorbell rang. My heart skipped a beat. We almost never had unannounced visitors. Bradley liked to control exactly who entered his world. "Elizabeth, get the door," he ordered without looking up from the sports section. I dried my hands on my apron and walked down the hall. Through the frosted glass, I could see the outline of a tall man in a suit. Something in my chest clenched. Even after 39 years, I knew that silhouette. I opened the door. There stood Otto, looking just as nervous as I felt. In his hands he held a small bouquet of wildflowers, daisies and black-eyed Susans, just like the ones he used to bring me in college. Seeing those flowers nearly brought me to tears. "Hello, Elizabeth," he said softly. "I hope you don't mind me coming by. I got your address from—" He hesitated, looking almost shy for a moment. "I hired someone to find you years ago. I've known where you live for a long time, but I never had the courage to knock on your door. After Sunday night, I just couldn't stay away anymore." "Otto," I breathed, my eyes flicking nervously toward the kitchen where Bradley was still buried in his newspaper. "This isn't a good time." "Who's at the door, Elizabeth?" Bradley's voice thundered from the kitchen. Otto's jaw tightened when he heard him. Even from the other room, Bradley's tone carried that familiar edge of ownership that made my skin crawl. "A friend," I called back, my voice shaking. From college." I heard the newspaper slap onto the table and Bradley's heavy footsteps coming closer. Otto stepped a little nearer to me, his eyes searching my face. "Are you afraid of him?" he asked quietly. The gentleness in his voice nearly shattered me. Before I could answer, Bradley appeared at my shoulder, his presence instantly thickening the air between us. He was a few inches shorter than Otto, but carried himself like he owned everything his eyes landed on. "Well, well," Bradley said with fake cheerfulness, "if it isn't the famous Otto Blackwell. What brings you to our humble home?" Otto's expression stayed polite, but distant. "I wanted to apologize for the scene at the engagement dinner," he said evenly. "Seeing Elizabeth after so many years, it caught me by surprise." "I'll bet it did," Bradley replied, that sharp edge creeping into his voice. "Elizabeth has that effect on people, always managing to cause trouble without meaning to." I saw Otto's hands curl into fists at his sides. The boy I'd known in college had been soft-spoken, gentle. The man standing in front of me now still had that kindness, but there was steel there too, shaped by years of business battles and hard decisions. "Actually," Otto said carefully, "I think Elizabeth handled herself with extraordinary grace under very difficult circumstances." The two men locked eyes, and for a moment it felt like I was watching two players at a chessboard, except I was the piece being fought over, though neither of them would admit it. "Well," Bradley said at last, his smile tight, "it was nice of you to stop by, but we're quite busy today. Elizabeth has a lot of housework to catch up on." "Actually," I heard myself interrupt, surprising not only them but me as well. "I was just about to go grocery shopping. Otto, would you like to come with me? We could catch up properly." The silence that followed was suffocating. Bradley's face flushed that familiar, dangerous purple. But with Otto standing there, he couldn't explode the way he usually did. Instead, he forced a thin smile. "Of course, dear," he said. "Don't be too long. You know how I worry." The threat was buried under the words, but it was still there. Otto heard it too. I saw it in the way his expression hardened. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Otto in a small cafe across town, feeling strangely like I was 19 again. He'd insisted on driving, and his car, a simple sedan, surprised me. For a man as wealthy as he was, I'd expected something flashy, ostentatious. But Otto had never been interested in putting on a show. "You don't have to pretend with me, Elizabeth," he said gently after the waitress left our coffees on the table. "I saw the way you flinched when he raised his voice. How long has he been treating you like that?" I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, needing the heat to steady me. "It's not what you think," I said weakly. "Bradley's just traditional." "Traditional men don't humiliate their wives in public," Otto replied firmly. "Traditional men don't talk to the women they love the way he spoke to you on Sunday." The word love hung between us, heavy with everything we hadn't said in 39 years. I kept my gaze fixed on the swirl of coffee in my cup, afraid to look up. "Tell me about your life," Otto said quietly, shifting the conversation, but not really. "Are you happy, Elizabeth? Truly happy?" Such a simple question. Yet I couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked me that. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had cared. "I have Dylan," I said at last. "He's a good son. He's successful, kind, engaged to a wonderful woman. That's enough." "That's not what I asked," Otto said softly. I finally lifted my eyes to his. Time had touched him. His hair was more silver than dark now, and there were deeper lines at the corners of his eyes, but he was still handsome. More than that, he still looked at me as if I mattered, as if my feelings were important. "I used to paint," I heard myself admit. "When Dylan was little, I'd paint while he napped, mostly landscapes, flowers, pretty things. Bradley said it was a waste of time and money, so I stopped." "Do you still want to paint?" Otto asked. I gave a short, bitter laugh. "I'm 59, Otto. It's a little late for that kind of dream." "Elizabeth," he leaned in, his voice intense but gentle. "I'm 60 and I still have dreams. It's never too late." We sat there in quiet for a moment, and I felt something shifting inside me. Something I'd thought had died a long time ago. Hope. "What about you?" I asked. "Are you married? Do you have children?" Otto's expression softened with a kind of sorrow. "I was married once," he said quietly. "About 10 years after you left. Her name was Catherine. She was a good woman." He paused, searching for the right words. "But I couldn't love her the way she deserved. She knew it too. We divorced after 2 years. It was peaceful, no children." "And Sophia?" I asked, thinking of his beautiful daughter. "Adopted," Otto explained. "Catherine and I took her in when she was 8. Her parents died in a car accident and she ended up in the foster system. Even after Catherine and I divorced, Sophia chose to stay with me. She's been the light of my life." I thought of Dylan. He'd been the light of mine too. The only light, really. The only thing that made my marriage even barely bearable. "Elizabeth," Otto said softly, "there's something I need to tell you." I felt my heart tighten. "After you disappeared, I looked for you everywhere," he continued. "I hired private investigators, chased every lead. When I finally found you, you were already married to Bradley. You already had Dylan. You looked happy in the photos, so I stayed away." My chest ached. "You found me 15 years ago?" Otto nodded. "The investigator took pictures at Dylan's high school graduation. You were smiling. Bradley had his arm around you. I thought," his voice faltered, "I thought you'd found the life you wanted." "Those pictures," I whispered, remembering that day. I was smiling because my son was graduating, not because I was happy with Bradley. Otto's fingers tightened around his cup. "If I had known. If I'd had even the slightest idea what your marriage was really like." "What would you have done?" I asked. "I would have fought for you," he answered without a second's hesitation. "I would have reminded you that you deserved more. I would have shown you that there were other options. The conviction in his voice made my heart race. This wasn't just nostalgia. It wasn't idle curiosity. Otto still had real, living feelings for me. "Otto," I began, but he lifted his hand gently. "I know this is complicated," he said. "I know you have a life, responsibilities. But Elizabeth, after seeing you on Sunday, after seeing how he treated you, I can't pretend I don't still care. I can't pretend losing you wasn't the biggest regret of my life." Tears spilled down my cheeks. "You don't understand. I can't just leave. Bradley would never let me go. And Dylan is 39 years old," Otto said softly. "He's engaged. He's starting his own family. Don't you think it's time you start living for yourself?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed on the table. A text from Bradley flashed across the screen. "Where are you? You've been gone 2 hours. Get home now." Otto saw the message. He saw the flash of fear that crossed my face. "I have to go," I said quickly, standing so fast my chair scraped the floor. "He'll be angry if I'm late." Otto rose with me, pulling out his wallet and leaving cash on the table. "Elizabeth, wait." He took a business card from his pocket and pressed it into my hand. "If you ever need anything at all, you call me, day or night." He took my other hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "I meant what I said Sunday night," he whispered. "I never stopped loving you, and I'm not giving up on us this time." The drive home passed in a blur. My mind kept circling back to Otto's words, his touch, the fierce promise in his eyes. For 39 years, I'd told myself I'd chosen correctly, that marrying Bradley had been the sensible, responsible path. But sitting across from Otto in that tiny cafe, I remembered what it felt like to be cherished instead of tolerated. I remembered what it felt like to have someone care about my dreams, my thoughts, my happiness. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Bradley's silhouette in the front window, waiting. My hands shook as I turned off the engine. In my purse, Otto's business card felt impossibly heavy, as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. As I walked toward the house, one thought echoed in my mind. Everything had changed. For 3 decades, I'd existed as Bradley's wife, Dylan's mother. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten how to be Elizabeth. Otto had reminded me that she still existed, buried deep, but not gone. The only question was whether it was too late to bring her back. Bradley opened the door before I could reach for the knob, his expression dark with suspicion. "You were gone a long time for grocery shopping," he said pointedly, his eyes dropping to my empty hands. "I forgot my wallet," I lied smoothly. "I'll go back tomorrow." As I walked past him, I could feel Otto's card pressing against my palm through the lining of my purse. For the first time in decades, I had a secret that belonged only to me. And instead of feeling like betrayal, it felt like breathing fresh air after years in a locked room. The meetings with Otto continued for the next 2 weeks. We'd arranged to see each other in small cafes tucked away in parts of town Bradley never visited. I told Bradley I was running errands, going to the library, paying bills, little lies that felt enormous to someone who had spent 39 years telling the truth about everything, from grocery receipts to how long it took to get back from the store. Each time I saw Otto, another layer of numbness seemed to peel away. He brought me poetry books, asked about the paintings I still dreamed of creating, and talked about his housing projects with the same fire he'd had as a student. When he described the families moving into safe, beautiful homes, his eyes lit up, and I fell in love with him all over again. But the best part was the way he looked at me. Not like Bradley, who saw only flaws, burdens, inconveniences. Otto looked at me like I was precious, like my voice mattered, like I mattered. It was during our 4th meeting that Otto finally asked the question I'd been dreading. "Elizabeth," he said gently, setting his coffee cup down, "I need to know the truth about Dylan's father." We were in a little bookshop cafe on the north side of town, surrounded by the smell of old paper and fresh pastries. My hands were shaking as I reached into my purse and pulled out the small silver locket I'd been carrying for 39 years. "You gave this to me for my 19th birthday," I said, opening it to show him the tiny pressed flower inside. I was wearing it the day I found out I was pregnant." Otto stared at the locket, and I watched the realization slowly spread across his face. "You kept it all this time," he whispered. "It was the only piece of you I could keep," I said, my voice breaking. "Otto, Dylan isn't Bradley's son. He's yours." The silence that followed felt endless. All the color drained from Otto's face, then rushed back in a storm of emotions I couldn't quite name. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "My son?" he breathed. "Dylan is my son?" I nodded, tears blurring my vision. "I was going to tell you. But then Margaret showed me that newspaper article about your father's business and convinced me you'd never be able to provide for us. I was 19, scared, alone. I thought I was protecting him." Otto's hands trembled as he reached across the table and took mine. "Elizabeth, that article," he said quietly. "My father's company did fail, but not because he cheated anyone. He co-signed loans for friends who couldn't pay them back. We lost everything trying to help other people. Within 5 years, I rebuilt what we lost, and more." The bitter irony hit me like a punch. I had given up the love of my life to save my child from poverty, and instead had sent us both into a life that was poor in every way that truly mattered. 39 years, Otto whispered, his voice cracking. I missed 39 years of my son's life. "Otto, I'm so sorry," I sobbed. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought—" "Shh," he murmured, sliding his chair around to sit beside me. He wrapped his arms around me as I cried. "You were 19 and alone. You made the best decision you could with what you knew. But Elizabeth, we have to tell him the truth." The idea of telling Dylan that his entire life was built on a lie nearly paralyzed me. "What if he hates me?" I choked out. "What if he thinks I'm a monster for lying to him all these years?" "Dylan is a good man," Otto said firmly. "I can see that, even from the little I've seen. Good men understand that sometimes people make impossible choices in impossible situations." That evening, when I pulled into the driveway, Dylan's car was already there. He was sitting at the kitchen table with Bradley, and they both turned to look at me as I walked in. The air felt heavy with something I couldn't quite name. "Mom," Dylan said, standing to hug me. "Dad told me you've been spending time with Mr. Blackwell. Is everything okay?" I glanced at Bradley. His expression was cool, controlled, calculating. He'd started his campaign. "Your mother's been acting strangely since the engagement dinner," Bradley said, his tone dripping with fake concern. "Running off for hours, making excuses. I'm worried about her mental health." "My mental state is just fine," I replied, surprised at the steadiness of my own voice. "Is it?" Bradley shot back. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're having some kind of midlife crisis, letting yourself get swept up in romantic fantasies about the past." Dylan frowned, looking between us. "What is he talking about, Mom?" I looked at my son, Otto's son, and suddenly I knew I couldn't keep lying. Not anymore. He deserved the truth, even if it burned everything to the ground. "Dylan," I said quietly, "I need to tell you something about your father." Bradley's face went chalk white. "Elizabeth, don't you dare—" "Shut up," I said, more sharply than I'd spoken to him in years. "For once in your life, just shut up and let me talk." Dylan's eyes widened. He had never heard me speak to Bradley like that. 39 years ago, I was in love with someone else," I continued, my voice gaining strength as I went on. "His name was Otto Blackwell, and we were planning to get married. When I found out I was pregnant, I was manipulated into believing Otto couldn't provide for us, that marrying Bradley was the responsible choice. So I lied to Otto, broke his heart, and married Bradley to give you a name." The kitchen was so silent I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Dylan stared at me, stunned, while Bradley's expression flickered between rage, panic, and calculation. "You're saying—" Dylan began slowly, his voice unsteady. "You're saying that Otto Blackwell is my biological father?" I nodded, tears spilling over. I've regretted my decision every single day for 39 years. This is insane! Bradley exploded, lurching to his feet so fast his chair crashed to the floor. Elizabeth, you're having some kind of breakdown. Dylan, don't listen to this. But Dylan wasn't looking at Bradley anymore. His eyes were locked on me, full of shock, and something like understanding. That's why you always looked so sad when I was growing up, he said quietly. That's why you never seemed truly happy. Even at my graduations, my birthdays, you were mourning the life you gave up. I was never unhappy because of you, I said quickly. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. But yes, I admitted, I was mourning what could have been. Bradley stepped between us, his face twisted with rage. That's enough, Dylan. Your mother is clearly having some kind of mental breakdown. She's been sneaking around town with this man, filling her head with romantic fantasies. Have you been meeting with him? Dylan asked me, completely ignoring Bradley. Yes, I said, my voice steady. We've been talking, trying to understand what really happened all those years ago. And? Dylan pressed. I looked at my son, this good, compassionate man I'd raised, and decided I wouldn't lie anymore. And I still love him, I said quietly. I never stopped loving him. The confession detonated in the room like a silent explosion. Bradley's face darkened to a violent shade of purple, but Dylan's expression wasn't disgusted or betrayed. It was thoughtful, almost relieved. Mom, Dylan said softly, how has he treated you? Bradley, I mean. Really treated you? No one had ever asked me that so directly. Dylan, don't encourage this, Bradley snapped. Your mother is clearly— I wasn't talking to you, Dylan cut in sharply. For a moment, I heard Otto's strength in his voice. Mom, I asked you a question. I looked at Dylan, then at Bradley, then back at my son. For 39 years, I had protected Bradley's image, smoothed things over, made excuses, pretended his cruelty was just his way. He treats me like a servant, I said finally. He humiliates me in public, controls every aspect of my life, and makes me feel worthless every single day. Dylan's jaw tightened, and anger flashed in his eyes, but not at me. Is that true? He asked Bradley. Your mother exaggerates, Bradley said dismissively. She's always been overly dramatic. Answer the question, Dylan said, his voice low and controlled. Have you been emotionally abusing my mother for the last 39 years? Bradley sputtered, clearly not used to being challenged by his own son. I don't have to listen to this. Elizabeth, tell him you're sorry for this ridiculous story and let's move on. But I wasn't sorry. For once in my life, I wasn't going to apologize for telling the truth. Dylan, I said quietly, there's something else you need to know. Otto doesn't know you're his son. I never told him. Dylan stared at me for a long moment, then slowly pulled his phone from his pocket. What's his number? He asked. Dylan, what are you doing? I asked, my heart pounding. I'm calling my father, he said firmly. My real father. Bradley lunged for the phone, but Dylan stepped out of reach, already dialing. Hello, Mr. Blackwell? This is Dylan Morrison, he said, his voice steady. I think it's time we had a conversation about my mother and about me. As I listened to my son arrange a meeting with the man who'd always been his true father, I could feel nearly 4 decades of lies and secrets finally beginning to fracture. It was terrifying, and it was liberating. Bradley stood off to the side, his face frozen in a mask of fury and defeat. He'd lost control of the story, lost his hold on both Dylan and me. For the first time in our marriage, he had no power. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I'm leaving, I said suddenly, surprising even myself with how certain I sounded. I'm filing for divorce. You can't, Bradley snarled. You have nothing. You are nothing without me. You're wrong, I replied, standing taller than I had in years. I have 39 years of my life to reclaim, and I have a son who loves me enough to care about my happiness. Dylan ended the call and looked at me with something I'd never fully seen in his eyes before: respect. Otto's on his way, he said. It's time this family stopped lying. As we waited for Otto to arrive, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into a future I couldn't see. I was terrified, but for the first time in decades, I wasn't jumping alone. I had my son. I had the man I'd never stopped loving. And most importantly, I finally had myself back. 30 minutes later, I watched through the front window as Otto parked his car and walked toward our house. Even from a distance, I could see the determination in his stride, the set of his shoulders. This wasn't the gentle college boy who once read poetry under an oak tree. This was a man who had built an empire and who was ready to fight. Bradley had spent the last half hour pacing the living room like a trapped animal, switching between threats and pathetic attempts at manipulation. "You really think he wants you now?" he sneered. "You're 59, Elizabeth. You're not the young girl he remembers." But Dylan stayed beside me the entire time, his calm presence giving me strength I'd been told I didn't have. When Otto knocked, I opened the door myself. His eyes went straight to mine, searching my face for signs of damage. When he saw the tear tracks on my cheeks but the resolve in my posture, his expression changed. Relief, anger, and fierce protectiveness all at once. "Elizabeth," he said softly. Then he turned to Dylan. "And you must be my son." The words hung between them, heavy with 39 years of lost time. Dylan stepped forward and held out his hand. Otto took it, and I watched as father and son truly met for the first time, this time with the truth finally out in the open. "I have so many questions," Dylan said quietly. "And I have 39 years of answers," Otto replied, his voice thick with emotion. Bradley chose that moment to insert himself, marching into the foyer with forced bravado. "Well, isn't this sweet?" he sneered. "The happy little family reunion." His voice dripped with sarcasm. "Otto, you've caused enough chaos. I think it's time you left." Otto turned to him, and I saw something sharp and dangerous flicker in his eyes. "Actually, Bradley," he said evenly, "I think you and I need to talk, man to man." "I don't have anything to say to you," Bradley snapped, but there was a crack in his confidence. He was used to towering over me, but Otto was a different kind of opponent. "I have plenty to say to you," Otto continued, calm but lethal. "For starters, I'd like to know how you justify 39 years of emotional abuse. I'd like to know how you sleep at night, knowing you've spent 4 decades breaking the spirit of the most beautiful woman I've ever known." Bradley's face turned a furious red. "You know nothing about our marriage," he shot back. "Elizabeth is my wife." "Elizabeth is not your property," Dylan cut in, his voice steady and strong. Pride surged in my chest. "And from what I've seen my whole life, you've treated her like unpaid help, not like a partner." Watching them, I felt strangely detached, like I was standing outside my own life, finally seeing it clearly. The man, who had loomed so large over me for so long, suddenly looked small, petty, cornered between Otto and Dylan. "Elizabeth," Otto said, turning to me gently, "I need you to hear this. Whatever you decide, I'll stand by you. If you choose to stay and work things out with Bradley, I'll respect it. But if you decide to leave, I'll help you. You won't have to do it alone." His promise hung in the air like a lifeline. For nearly 40 years, I'd felt trapped because I had nowhere to go, no income of my own, no savings, no one I could turn to. Bradley controlled the money, the house, the friendships, my entire world. "I can't," I whispered, old fears clawing their way back up. "Bradley's right about one thing. I don't have anything. No money, no career, no place to live. I'm 59. How am I supposed to start over now?" Otto stepped closer, his voice firm but tender. "Elizabeth, do you remember what I told you about the affordable housing communities I've built?" he asked. "One of them has a beautiful art studio that's been empty for months. The woman who used to rent it was an older lady who taught painting classes. She passed away last spring. I've been waiting for the right person to take over." My heart stopped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you want it, it's yours," he said. "Rent-free for the first year while you get settled. There's a small apartment above the studio. You could teach art, sell your paintings, be the artist you were always meant to be. The generosity of it stole my breath. Bradley pounced. "See?" he said triumphantly. "He's trying to buy you, Elizabeth. This is exactly what I've been telling you. He thinks he can swoop in and play hero because he has money." "No," Otto said firmly, not even glancing at Bradley. His eyes stayed on mine. "I'm offering Elizabeth what she's always deserved: respect, support, and a chance to live her own life, something you've never given her." I looked at the three men in front of me, each one symbolizing a different possible future. Bradley, the man who wanted to keep me exactly where I'd always been, small, controlled, afraid. Dylan, the son who wanted me to be happy, torn between loyalty to the man who raised him and the man who gave him life. And Otto, the man who was offering me freedom, asking for nothing except that I finally choose myself. The choice should have been obvious, but decades of conditioning don't vanish overnight. "I need time to think," I said at last. "Time to think?" Bradley exploded. "Elizabeth, this is insane. You're talking about throwing away our entire life for some childish fantasy. You're not 20 years old anymore." "Stop," I said, my voice cutting through his rant like a blade. "Just stop talking." His mouth snapped shut in shock. I had never spoken to him like that. "You're right about one thing," I continued. "I'm not 20 anymore. I'm 59, and I've wasted almost 40 years of my life being afraid. Afraid of choosing wrong, afraid of upsetting people, afraid of taking any risk at all." I turned to Otto, meeting his eyes. "I'm tired of being afraid." Hope flickered in his gaze, but he stayed silent. He wasn't pushing me, just waiting. "Bradley," I said, facing my husband, "I want a divorce." The words came out calm and clear. He staggered back as if I'd physically struck him. "You can't be serious," he stammered. "Elizabeth, you're having some kind of episode. You need to think this through." "I have been thinking about it," I said, "for 39 years. I should have left the first time you made me feel worthless. I should have left when you started controlling every detail of my life. I should have left the moment I realized you saw me as a convenience, not a person." "Where will you go?" he demanded, panic creeping into his voice. "What will you do? You have no skills, no education, no—" "She has me," Otto said quietly, "and she has Dylan. And most importantly, she has herself." "That's more than enough," Otto said calmly. Dylan moved to stand right beside me and nodded. "Mom, I should have said something years ago. I saw how he treated you, and I was too scared to confront him. I'm sorry." "You were just trying to survive in the only family you knew," I said, resting my hand on his arm. "I don't blame you for that, not for a second." Bradley looked around the room and finally seemed to realize he had no one left on his side. His expression cycled from anger to panic, then settled into something cold and calculating. "Fine," he said flatly. "But don't think this is going to be easy, Elizabeth. I'll fight you on everything. The house, the savings, all of it. You'll get nothing from me." "I don't want anything from you," I replied. "I just want my freedom." "And you'll have it," Otto said firmly. "My lawyer will contact you tomorrow about the divorce. This can be as easy or as difficult as you choose to make it, Bradley." The warning in his tone was soft but clear. Otto had resources Bradley couldn't compete with, and all of us knew it. "This isn't over," Bradley snarled, snatching his keys from the hallway table. "Elizabeth, when you come to your senses and realize what a mistake you've made, don't come running back to me." He slammed the door so hard, a framed photo fell off the wall and landed face down. The three of us stood in the sudden silence, trying to absorb what had just happened. "Are you sure about this?" Dylan asked quietly. "Once you file for divorce, there's no going back." I let the question sink in. Was I sure? Leaving Bradley meant stepping away from the warped version of security I'd clung to for decades. It meant starting over at 59 with nothing but hope, my own courage, and the help of a man I hadn't seen in nearly 40 years. But then I looked at Otto, really looked at him. This wasn't just about some old love story. This was about reclaiming the woman I'd been before I learned to shrink myself into silence. "I'm sure," I said at last. For the first time in 39 years, I am absolutely sure. Otto stepped closer and gently framed my face in his hands, just like he had at the country club. Elizabeth, he said softly, I need you to understand something. I'm not here to rescue you. You don't need rescuing. You need support. There's a difference. That distinction meant everything. Bradley had always acted like my savior, the man who gave me respectability and a roof over my head. Otto wasn't offering ownership. He was offering partnership, equality, respect. What happens now? I asked. Now, Otto said, instantly practical. You pack what you need for tonight. You'll stay in the guest room at my place until we can get the apartment over the studio ready for you. Tomorrow, we meet with my lawyer and start the paperwork. And after that? Dylan asked. Otto smiled, and for the first time since all of this began, his expression was pure joy. After that, he said, your mother finally gets to find out who she is when she's free to be herself. As I walked upstairs to pack a suitcase, I felt strangely weightless. Every step away from that life felt like peeling off a heavy coat I'd been forced to wear in every season. In my bedroom, Bradley's bedroom, I corrected myself, I packed slowly, deliberately. I took my clothes, a few pieces of jewelry, and the poetry books Otto had given me in college, the ones I'd hidden at the back of the closet for decades. Most importantly, I took the silver locket with the pressed flower. It had been my secret lifeline through 39 years of loneliness, a tiny reminder that, once upon a time, I had been loved completely and without conditions. Now, I no longer had to hide it. When I came downstairs with my suitcase, Otto and Dylan were talking quietly in the living room. They both looked up when they heard me. Ready? Otto asked. I took one last look around the house where I'd spent most of my adult life. By all logic, I should have felt grief, nostalgia, some deep ache over leaving it all behind. Instead, I felt like I was finally stepping out of a dark tunnel into sunlight. I'm ready, I said. 6 months later, I stood in front of my easel in the art studio, paintbrush in hand, sunlight pouring through the tall windows. The canvas before me was alive with color, a landscape of the small lake where Otto and I used to walk when we were young, now painted with the eyes of a woman who had finally come home to herself. The divorce had been finalized just 2 weeks earlier. True to his threats, Bradley fought me on every detail. But Otto's lawyer was relentless, and Bradley's attempts to punish me only made him look petty and cruel. In the end, I walked away with enough money to be comfortable. But more importantly, I walked away free. The studio had become everything Otto promised and more. 3 afternoons a week, I taught painting classes to a group of incredible women, ages 30 to 80. We called ourselves the Late Bloomers, and every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, the studio filled with laughter, music, and the soft scratch of brushes on canvas. In the last 4 months, I'd sold 12 paintings, proof that this wasn't just a cute hobby, but the beginning of a real second career. And the little apartment above the studio? It was nothing like the big, polished house I'd once shared with Bradley. It was better, because for the first time in my life, it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every book, every coffee mug in that little apartment had been chosen by me, for me. When I woke up in the mornings now, I heard birds outside my window instead of Bradley's criticism in my ears. The studio door chimed, and I looked up to see Otto stepping inside. Even after 6 months, my heart still picked up speed whenever I saw him. We'd taken things slow on purpose. I'd needed time to figure out who I was without Bradley, and Otto had given me that space, standing beside me the whole way. "How's the painting coming?" he asked, walking over to stand next to me at the easel. "Almost finished," I said, adding a final touch of gold to the autumn leaves reflected in the lake. "I think it's one of my best." Otto studied the canvas, his gaze warm and thoughtful. "You've captured something beautiful here. The light, the way it dances on the water. It reminds me of that day we spent at the lake when you were 19. Do you remember? October, you wore that yellow sweater that matched the leaves." I put down my brush and turned toward him, still amazed by how clearly he remembered the smallest details of our past. "I remember everything about that day," I said. You read me Elizabeth Barrett Browning's sonnets under the oak tree. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. He quoted softly, his eyes never leaving mine. I can't believe you still remember that, I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. I remember everything about you, Elizabeth, he said, lifting his hand to gently touch my cheek. I've had 40 years to replay those moments. There was a depth in his voice that made my breath catch. We'd been spending time together almost every day, dinners, walks through art museums, evenings where he brought me flowers from his garden, but we hadn't really talked about what came next, about what this was becoming. Otto, I started, but he lightly touched his finger to my lips. Before you say anything, he murmured, I have something for you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart stopped. 40 years ago, I was saving up to buy you an engagement ring, he said, his voice unsteady. I'd picked it out, put it on layaway at the jewelry store downtown. When you disappeared, I couldn't bring myself to cancel it. I kept paying on it, month after month, year after year, telling myself I was being foolish, but I couldn't let it go. He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant solitaire diamond ring. Not ostentatious or oversized, it looked exactly like what I would have chosen for myself at 19, and exactly what I'd choose now at 59. I picked it up from the jeweler last week, Otto said softly. Elizabeth Marie, will you marry me? Will you let me spend whatever years I have left trying to make up for the 40 we lost? I stared at the ring, then at his hopeful, nervous face. This wasn't some impulsive, panicked proposal from a young man afraid of losing his first love. This was a considered promise from a man who understood exactly what he was offering, and exactly what he was asking. Yes, I breathed. Yes, Otto, I'll marry you. His whole face lit up as he slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting those 40 years for this exact moment. He pulled me into his arms and kissed me, and for a heartbeat I felt like I was 19 again, full of hope and possibility. When we finally pulled apart, I was laughing and crying at the same time. I never thought I'd get another chance at this kind of happiness, I said. We're not getting a second chance, Otto replied, still holding me. We're getting our first real chance. Everything before this was just preparation. The wedding was small and perfect. Dylan walked me down the aisle of a little garden chapel, and Sophia stood at Otto's side as his best woman. My late bloomers painting group surrounded me like a living bouquet. Women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. All of us proof that it's never too late to begin again. Margaret Morrison, Bradley's sister, the one who had pushed me toward marrying him all those years ago, showed up at the reception unexpectedly. I hadn't seen her since the divorce, and I braced myself for criticism or judgment. Instead, she approached me with tears in her eyes. Elizabeth, she said quietly, I owe you an apology, a huge one. I pressured you to marry my brother because I thought financial security was the most important thing a woman could have. I was wrong. I can see now. You're truly happy, and I finally understand what that decision cost you back then. Her apology caught me completely off guard. For 40 years I'd carried a quiet bitterness toward Margaret for pushing me toward Bradley, but standing there in my wedding dress, with Otto's hand warm in mine, I realized that anger had finally let go of me. We all did what we thought was best with the information we had, I told her, echoing the words Otto once said to me. I forgive you, Margaret. She pulled me into a tight hug, and I felt another old wound quietly close. Bradley didn't come to the wedding. Later I heard through mutual friends that he was already seeing someone new, a much younger secretary from the dealership. I felt a flicker of pity for her, but mostly I felt relief. His moods, his ego, his need for control, they were no longer my responsibility. For our honeymoon, Otto took me to Italy, a dream I'd tucked away so long I'd almost forgotten it was mine. We spent 2 weeks wandering through museums, lingering in sidewalk cafes, and talking late into the night about everything we'd missed in those 40 lost years. One evening, we sat by the Trevi Fountain in Rome, watching tourists toss coins over their shoulders and make wishes. "Do you have any regrets?" Otto asked quietly. I really thought about it. Did I regret the decades with Bradley? The parts of myself I had buried? The time I could never get back? "I regret the pain," I said at last. "The loneliness. The fear. But I don't regret Dylan. And I don't regret what I learned about my own strength. If I hadn't gone through all of that, I might not appreciate what we have now." Otto took my hand and brushed his thumb over my wedding ring, the ring that had waited 40 years for me. "You know what I love most about us now?" he asked. "What?" I smiled. "We're not trying to relive our youth," he said. "We're not pretending to be 19 again. We're two people who've lived, who've messed up, who've learned, and who understand exactly how rare this kind of love is." He was right. What we had now was deeper than what we'd shared as teenagers. It was love refined by experience, strengthened by loss, and made precious because we knew how easily it could have slipped away forever. A year after our wedding, I held my first solo exhibition at a gallery in downtown Dallas. 30 paintings lined the walls, landscapes, portraits, still lifes, all created during my first year of freedom and rediscovery. Opening night was crowded with friends, collectors, and strangers who'd simply been moved by the invitation. Dylan stood by one of my paintings, enthusiastically explaining my work to a potential buyer. Across the room, Sophia glowed, her hands resting on her pregnant belly. Their first child, my first grandchild, would be born in the spring. Otto moved easily through the room, introducing me to people, pride written all over his face every time he said, "This is my wife, Elizabeth." "Mrs. Blackwell," the gallery owner said, approaching me with a pleased smile. "I'm happy to tell you we've sold 18 pieces tonight, and there's already a waiting list for commissions." Mrs. Blackwell. I was still getting used to that name, this new version of myself. Elizabeth Morrison had lived in the shadow of a controlling husband, defined by his status and by her role as Dylan's mom. Elizabeth Blackwell was something very different, an artist, a partner by choice instead of obligation, a woman who had finally learned she was allowed to take up space. "Thank you," I said, feeling the words all the way down to my bones. This is more than I ever dreamed of. When the crowd eventually left and the gallery grew quiet, Otto and I stood alone in the middle of the room, surrounded by my work. Little red dots on the tags marked each painting that had sold, tiny symbols of victory and rebirth. "Proud of yourself?" Otto murmured, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I leaned against him, taking it all in. "More amazed than proud," I admitted. A year ago I was 59 and convinced my story was basically over. Now, this. "Not this," he corrected gently. "You. This isn't just about the paintings or the gallery or even about us. This is about you remembering who you always were and finally letting the world see her." Later that night, we sat together on the balcony of our penthouse, looking out over the Dallas skyline. The city glowed below us, full of lights and motion and possibilities. "What are you thinking about?" Otto asked, noticing how quiet I'd become. "That girl who used to dream about a life like this," I said softly. "She had to wait 60 years, but she got it. We got it." Otto took my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "We got it," he agreed, "and we're going to enjoy every minute we've got left. And now I'm curious about you, the one listening to my story. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Have you ever had to rebuild your life after years of fear, conformity, or silence? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And while you're here, I'll leave 2 more of my most shocking and emotional stories on the final screen. Click on the one that calls to you next. They both have endings you won't see coming. Thank you for staying with me until the very end.